Welcome back to FMR Therapy. JC here, the people's therapist coming at you. And this is very exciting. I got a request on the YouTube to do an adductor stretch, specifically Adductor Magnus. So this is exciting. I want to start by saying thank you to Ailsa, as I'm guessing how you would say your name, Ailsa, for requesting a video. So here we are. We're going to do an adductor stretch specifically for Adductor Magnus, but I also want to talk a little bit about stretching. So I'm not an anti-stretcher. I'm totally into stretching, but I'm into doing it smart. So a stretch, it's really just your sensation of the end of your range of motion in a position or in a movement, and you get that sensation of stretching. But it's also the action of the antagonist muscle, right, contracting. So the stretching muscle has an antagonist that's contracting, and the other muscle, the stretching muscle, is lengthening or stretching. So it's just the action that that muscle is taking in that movement. If we take the bicep and the tricep, it's easy to understand that if I flex in the bicep, my tricep is stretching. It doesn't feel like a stretch, but that is the action that the tricep is taking on, is the stretch portion of a muscle's movement. So that's what we really want to create anytime we're trying to stretch, but we also need to feel the stretch in order to feel like we've done anything. So I'm going to show you a few different things to do. First up, my very, very favorite for getting an adductor stretch, and this is actually what I do when I'm warming up for squatting or lunging of any kind, because the adductors, all of them, but also the Adductor Magnus specifically, they bring the legs together, right? So adduction of the leg is bringing the legs together. But they also, well, the Adductor Magnus does a little bit of hip flexion, a little bit of hip external rotation, a little bit of hip internal rotation, and even a little bit of hip extension. It's very involved in a lot of different movements. The most important thing, though, is pelvis stabilization. Now, I care about that when I'm squatting, when I'm deadlifting, when I'm lunging, when I'm running, when I'm walking, pelvis stabilization. So I want those adductors to be in check. Let's start with my very favoriteest one. I'm going to do it on a table here, just for ease of the video so that you can see what I'm doing. You're going to be on the floor. Get onto your hands and knees like this, right? With your toes tucked up, and you're on your hands and knees just like this. And also with your knees wide, right? So I want you actually in your squat width knees, but that might just be also, let's just describe that as a little bit wider than your own shoulders, right? So we're on our hands and knees in this position. Then what you're going to do is you're going to take one leg and you're going to jut it out to the side. Before we do this, your pelvis needs to stay in the middle of these two knees. So try not to move your pelvis onto, right? So this is my hips, move onto this leg, right? So now my pelvis is more over here. I need it in the middle, right? So if I'm in this position, I'm just going to simply boop, put that leg out. So this knee is still going wide of my shoulder and wide of my pelvis. And then I've got one leg out. I prefer to have my foot flat on the floor like so. You're going to get a much better adductor stretch in this position. Then all I'm going to do here, you guys, I'm just going to sit back, right? I'm just going to sit my keister downward. This thigh is now on top of this lower leg, and I'm feeling a really good stretch in that Adductor Magnus and the adductor group. Then I'm going to rock up, and I'm going to rock back. And we can spend a solid, 30 to 60 to 90 seconds just rocking back and forth like this. You'll feel the deeper stretch as you lean back, and then when you come back up onto your hands and knee, that stretch will reduce a little bit. And now what we're doing is just tapping into that sensation of stretch as we move around, though, instead of just staying in that one solid position. Some of you might want to dip that toe up a little bit and get a little bit deeper on that hamstring. Some of you might not have the ankle range of motion to keep your foot down, so your foot will be just like this. That's okay. You're looking for that stretch sensation on the inside of the leg, all right? So we're going to spend 90 seconds, maybe even 2 minutes on one leg, then we're going to switch to the other leg. Remember, don't shift your hip over, right? Keep your hips right in the middle and just bring that leg out. If you do shift over, like so, because that's the only way you can get your leg out there, then just know that you need to get back into a wide knee position on this leg, right? And again, we're just gonna rock, right? So we're coming up onto our hands and knees, and then we're sitting back, and then up onto our hands and knees, and then sitting back. And just spending a bunch of time in that position, getting dynamic with it and moving around. Because those adductors, they don't just do one thing, they do a bunch of different things. So we kind of want to, chase where we're gonna get different stretches throughout a movement. The next thing I want to talk about is the Sumo Deadlift position. So I'm going to move this table out the way, and we're going to get into the Sumo Deadlift, because I think that's also a really great way to now start kind of neurologically tapping into that stretch position of the adductors by using its antagonist, or the muscles that pull the legs apart, the abductors, to get into a position that asks for a stretch. That one's coming up in just a sec. All right, we've got the table out of the way so that we can talk about the Sumo Deadlift position. And we're talking about this to get a stretch out of the adductors by getting a contraction out of the muscles that pull the legs apart, or the abductors, abductors, okay? So if I get into my sumo stance, then I'm basically just feet super wide compared to my squat stance or my shoulder width, and toes pointed out at about a 45-degree angle. Everybody's going to be a little bit different here depending on their leg length, but ideally what you want is that when you're sitting down into that sumo stance, that your shins are vertical, relatively vertical, right? This is going to be a big stretch for the adductors. And so many of you, as you get down in there, your shins are going to kind of want to come towards one another, your knees rather, going to want to come towards one another. This is where the work is going to be at getting a really good stretch. We're just going to do a hold here. So as you're sitting your hips back, right, because this would be a sumo deadlift position, sitting the hips back and then just dropping the hips down into that squatting position, I also want you to actively be pulling the knees outward, right? So I'm getting into that position, and then as I'm holding this position, I can do whatever I want with my arms. I can even just kind of rest them on my knees if I need that extra support, but I'm actively pulling my knees out. I'm pulling them this way, right? Let me show you from the side here. So I get into that nice wide stance. I'm going to hinge and then just sit into that position. Then I'm pulling my knees this way, right? So not this way, this way. I'm actively trying to spread my knees and spread my thighs even wider into that position. And then I can just hold, right? Obviously this one's going to be challenging. So let's hold for smaller amounts of time. 10 seconds and then rest, and then get back into that and do it for another 10 seconds and collect a minute of doing that. Or if you can hold for 20 seconds, hold for 20 seconds and then rest. But by hold, we're not just sitting down there in just kind of a lazy position. We're literally driving our knees out the entire time that we're holding. One of the things I'm noticing that my foot wants to do in this position is roll that away. So obviously we want to pay attention to that big toe and be pushing that big toe into the ground actively as we're pulling the knee out so that we're not rolling onto the outside edges of our foot. Last but not least, so now we've talked about, sort of passively stretching the adductors in the adductor rock. Then we've talked about getting into a really active, stretch for the adductors by working on pulling on those abductors and kind of external rotators. Now let's talk about even more action that's going to give us a stretch. I like the Cossack squat for this. Also known as just the single leg lunge, right? Side lunge, if you will, lateral lunge. So same position for our start position. And now I'm just going to start moving side to side here, right? As I'm moving side to side, this leg here is getting a little stretch, while the other leg I'm working on trying to keep that knee out as I go from that side to side position. But even more important in this particular movement would be that I actually try to adduct, right? So if I'm in this position, then I'm not really thinking about pushing off with this leg as much as I'm thinking about pulling my body back to center with this leg. So I go down to here, I'm allowing this leg to contract as I bring me down, but now I'm actually going to pull the ground sort of with my foot and yank my body back into center with this leg, this straight leg. The lower I can go, the more of a stretch I'm going to get. Ideally, I'd be able to do this with a nice tall chest, meaning as I get into this position, I don't really want my hips to pop up like that and then unfold. So really just stay as high as you need to stay in your single leg squat in order to keep that nice tall chest. Because again, those adductors and Adductor Magnus is a stabilizer for that pelvis. So if I start folding and then unhinging, I'm going to get out of those tissues a little bit. You're still going to definitely be in an adductor stretch, I guarantee it. But what we want is to show some control and build some strength there. So those are my top 3 that I like to do for the adductors, and specifically Adductor Magnus. Hopefully this was a good stretch, as well as a good introduction to how to really get a stretch and how to make tissues work better when you're working on making them looser, stronger, and better than ever. All right, thanks for sticking around, and we'll see you next time.